Hey everybody, doing the little dance at the beginning. That's like a little icebreaker for me. But I am Zephaniah Francois, your emotional health advocate. If you identify as a person, I'm advocating for your emotions. I'm also an advocate of love. I advocate for love because I believe love is enough and love is the power to support us in living emotionally healthy, right? So let's jump right in. A little bit of background and some disclosures. I'm advocating for everyone's emotions. So no matter what your background is, I do want you to feel free. I want you to be open to hearing this information, right? I have over 10 years of experience devoted to observation, right? Observation of what? Myself, humans, and just our emotions. I have a background in clinical mental health counseling, and I decided to create my own career path. Why? Because I couldn't identify with my work. I couldn't explore what I believe my purpose was. I couldn't grow into my purpose within my work. And so I took a chance on me. So here I am. The thing that I'm most passionate about, my work is a reflection of how Jesus has been to me and how he continues to be to me. And the thing that I'm most passionate about is being to others how he is to me. And so for me, that is the idea of living emotionally healthy. If I could sum my life up, I would sum it up to the idea of my emotional health, because that is how I navigate through life. And if I wasn't emotionally healthy, I don't know where I would be. So it's not about what I have, what I don't have, what I've experienced. It's about how God's love continues to teach me how to maintain the integrity of my personhood. And when I look into our world, I see a vast amount of people suffering, whether be it silently or loudly. Just to be a little transparent, I was one of those people suffering silently. And now this is the idea of me saying no more. I will no longer suffer in silence anymore, because I know the impact of God's love in my own life, right? And now I really, really want to see the impact of God's love on others and in other people's life. Don't run off, because I know that might sound cliche, right? I believe that we live in a world where love has become relative. Is that right or wrong? I wouldn't say it's wrong, but what I would say is I don't see where we make love relative to how God describes himself. So we don't have a baseline. If I were to ask 20 people what love looks like, how they define love, I can almost bet $100 that all 20 people would have a different definition and meaning of love, right? And so if you want to, even feel free, drop in the comment. If you're just joining, drop in the comment, how do you define love? What does love look like to you? And share that with me, right? Because I'm really establishing a community, a space where we can start to have these conversations. And the why is I want you to know that your emotions have a voice and they want to be heard. And love is the language to speak back to them, right? So let's move forward. Why do I think this is important? Why am I advocating for our emotions? Why am I advocating for love? Well, because on a worldwide level, I believe that we are facing identity crisis. That's what I believe the root of our issues are. Not the sum, but the root of most of the things that we see. And when I say see, think about you watching the news. Think about social media. Think about crime-related things. Think about domestic violence. Think about anything that you might be navigating through as a human being, good, bad, and ugly, right? So we don't want to confine this to drama and trauma. But when we look at issues that we deal with on an everyday basis, from something as subtle as how you brush your teeth, when you brush your teeth, when you use the bathroom, so I really want to open this up. This is not confined to any one thing. This is the essence of our being. But when we look out into the world, when we look at mental health, right? And I really want to be sensitive around that area. But when we look at mental health, when we look at relationship conflict, right? At the root of it, are very much so interconnected, is that person's emotional health. So that is why I'm advocating for the voice of our emotions, because I believe that if we can make a conscious decision to take personal responsibility for our emotional health, we can begin to experience the power of love. And that is why I'm advocating for love. So let's move forward. I do have some notes with me. I want to stay a little structured. And I want to kind of present the framework and baseline that I myself pull from for emotional and experiential language. But also, this baseline is my overall constant filter, right? So let's define baseline. What is baseline, right? Think of baseball and think of the base, right? Anytime they're moving around, you got to go back to home base. That's when you touch a score, right? So I want to define baseline. If you look it up, take the time, you can look it up, but I also want to establish language around what it means in the context of emotional and experiential language. Baseline is a pool of information, right? But anything can function as a baseline. Your thoughts can be a baseline, your habits, your patterns, relationships, so I really want to open this up, right? Baseline is a pool of information that functions as a filter, right? So we've already established our emotions have a voice. They want to be heard. They're always speaking or suggesting something. The second part of emotional and experiential language is understanding that our experiences carry meanings. And oftentimes we are operating, identifying with that meaning, whatever that experience means to you, you're identifying with and you're operating from that space. The same as our emotions. Oftentimes we are not relating, connecting to our emotions, experiencing them. We are becoming our emotions, right? And what does that look like? Think about how you feel in any given moment. Think about what your mental health looks like. Think about how you navigate through life, right? And again, we don't want to frame this around drama and trauma. Just think about how you navigate through life. When you're going out to eat with your girlfriends, when you're hanging out with your guy friends, right? When you're playing basketball, when you're on a business meeting, right? So I really, really, really want to open this up. When I say baseline, that is a pool of information. How does it work? How does it function as a filter? Now let's talk about filter. I think we all know it's going to be key for me to really, really highlight language. So when I say filter, I don't know what comes to mind, but for me, what comes to mind is separation, right? What stays, what goes, right? If you're making juice, if you have a juicer, that juicer is going to have some form of filter. If you have a strainer, think strainer when I say filter, right? Something's going to stay, something's going to go, right? And so it's going to produce the thing that you are more likely to want, right? So like if I'm making juice with a strainer, that pulp is going to stay in the strainer and I'm going to have the juice, right? So again, I just want to establish this language so that when I'm using these words, we're all on the same page, right? We're not operating from a different baseline, right? So moving forward, why is this important? I believe, now let's talk about identity. We kind of addressed the problem, which let's park on problem just for a little bit, okay, you guys? I'm new to this, so I'm giving myself a lot of grace as far as publicly speaking and sharing this information. So let's really, really, really park at the problem just for a moment. So we're going back to move forward, right? And allow me to look at my notes. If you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. So I believe that we live in a problem-centered, real solution-avoidant, feeling-focused, and information-saturated world, right? I believe we live in a world that is problem-centered. We center ourselves on what's wrong, what's going on. You know, pay attention. Listen to the language around. Now that we're establishing this conversation, I want you to go back. I don't want you to just take it from me, right? I want you to go into your life, go into your conversations, start paying attention to the language, right? What are we centering ourselves on? And how are we navigating through our conversations, right? So this is not, you know, me saying this is what's happening now. This is me saying, hey, let's go discover. Let's go into our lives, right? This may apply to some, but not to all. But overall, when I look into the world, it seems like we are more problem centered, right? Centered on problems. The second observation I've made, I believe that we are a real solution avoidant. We live in a real solution avoidant world, meaning that I don't know that we really honor real solutions. Like, we come up with solutions, but beyond the solution, what is it producing? What is it producing? So these are real questions, right? If I take the time to explore and identify a problem and I come to a resolve, which functions as the solution, beyond that, what is that producing in my life? So from my observation, I see so many different types of solutions, but beyond the solutions, I still see where, as a society and a world, we're suffering emotionally, right? So I want to make a comparison. I want to, because I'm saying this in light of, you know, this is not the idea of completely obliterating, but it is my hope to be a person, to be a voice, to make an impact. This is my contribution. This is my idea of giving back, in hopes that I can see more awareness around emotional health. Because I believe that love is the language to speak back, right? So I went forward, now I want to go back, right? So if we look at our solutions, beyond the solutions, what is the fruit of our solutions? How are the solutions showing up, right? And when we look into our world, like I said, I brought in the comparison of poverty, right? When we think about how many people are suffering in poverty, you know, but yet there's no lack, because just as many people, you know, and I mean, I don't have the statistics. I'm not one of those people. I don't go into the statistics. I just like to look at you can see, right? There's some people that are poor. There's some people that are rich. Right? If you don't go online and Google, if you don't go in the library, if you don't go do any research, which is, I identify as that, like I typically just don't do that, but I truly believe in observation. And from my observation, I've seen poor people, homeless people, and I see rich people, right? So I know that in essence, I don't believe that there is lack. And then my baseline, pulling from my baseline, I know that there is no lack. My baseline being love. Love is information, right? So just kind of using that as an example, when I say real solution avoidant, that's to say that this is not the idea of solutions that are not working, because I'm more than sure I see people getting help, and I see where solutions are actively contributing to our emotional well-being. And I'm excited about that. But overall, I do see where we live in a world and a society that is real solution avoidant. We got to explore that, because these are questions I have too. So drop in the comment, share, tell me your thoughts around that, right? So I have two more. The other thing is, I feel like we live in a world that is feeling focused, right? So we are more oriented towards how we feel in any given moment. Right? Again, pay attention to the language. Even myself, as I'm talking, it's like, I feel. And I'm consciously reminding myself, I believe, I think, right? Just understanding, I do want to associate, I do want to relate, connect to the feeling, but I want to hold myself accountable to being aware of how I'm operating, right? So I don't necessarily want my feelings to be the baseline, the filter of what I'm saying and how I'm identifying. Because for this information that I'm sharing, the baseline is my observation, what I have observed over the years and continue to observe, that contributes to why I am so passionate about being a voice, about being an advocate for our emotions, right? So going to the last point, I also believe that we live in an information saturated world. Like, we live in a world with so much information. Like, in my own personal life, I have to set boundaries and parameters around the information because it can be overstimulating. So for me, I have one source that acts as a filter, the baseline, and for me, that is the Bible. That is my baseline. And whatever information I choose to subscribe to, I hold myself accountable for taking personal responsibility for passing it through my filter, right? So I'm not overstimulated. So I'm not just, this allows me to have language around what I have, what I allow access to, what I go and research, right? If I'm a believer, and speaking for myself, I'm a believer, I'm content and satisfied with the Bible being the ultimate source in the canon of what I need within my spirituality, right? So personally for me, I've not gone outside of the Bible to say, oh, well, let me pick up this literature, no, I read the Bible, it references itself, right? So I go into, like, if there's any search, this is just an example, whatever now that we've established this language, go into your own life. Do you have a baseline? Have you established that, right? And if you do have an ultimate source, is it a constant source, right? You just want to kind of go in, now that I've established language around that, this is my baseline. So when it comes to information, be it on the internet, related to work, whatever it is, I have a filter, I have an understanding. How is this information going to work for me? What is it contributing to? Do I even need to expose myself to this? Because I don't like feeling overstimulated, right? And so that is the last point. I really feel like we live in a world that is oversaturated with information. How are you as an individual holding yourself accountable to what you subscribe to, what you're not subscribing to, and why? Right? How do you determine what is right, what is wrong, right? So it's beyond you subscribing to the information. Why are you subscribing to it? What is it, right? And what is your filter? What is your baseline? These are the things that I want to raise into awareness because I believe they contribute to our emotional health, right? And so this information for me, I've pulled it from love. That is my baseline, right? So that's a constant baseline for me. That is the framework. That is the tool of how I am transferring emotional and experiential language to facilitate this awareness, to facilitate conversations like this, so that I can inspire you to start hearing and recognizing the voice of your emotions, but beyond that, understanding that love is the voice and the language to speak back to them, right? So that is the next thing that I want to move into. And so remember, please put in the comments, how do you define love? What are your thoughts on what I'm saying so far? Please feel free to drop that in the comments. So we're going to move forward, and then we're going to wrap up in a little bit. So we've established my observation of what I think some of the issues are. In short, I believe the information that I stated earlier leads us to identity crisis, right? If our emotions have a voice and they're always speaking or suggesting something to us, beyond that, they always have the potential to interrupt, break our consciousness. So now we're no longer operating from how or with who we identify, right? So this is where, again, the whole idea of this is, one, facilitating awareness, two, recognizing if you don't even know, some people don't know, it's still a question for them. On a surface level, you can always recognize, hey, I am a person, I'm a human being, right? On an emotional plane, that's universal, whether you're black, white, rich, poor, we can all identify with having emotions. That's just a reality of human nature. You can see that, right? You don't have to pick up a book. You don't have to go on Google, right? We can all identify with happiness, joy, excitement. These are all things relative to emotion, right? So beyond that, I want to go into why I believe love is the power and the voice and the language for us to start speaking back to our emotions. And why I believe it is important for us to have a baseline, a constant, right? relative to the source of love. God is love. He describes himself as love. So that's the second part. This is the second half of what I want to move into, because I mentioned earlier that love is the baseline. Love is the framework. It is the filter, right? For emotional and experiential language and in my own personal life. And what I believe the world could begin experiencing is the power of love, where it is relative to the source of love, right? So we're going to go into, so I kind of mentioned, again, I'm looking at my notes. I kind of mentioned what I believe the problem issue is that we're facing as a whole in some capacity is identity crisis, right? And how do you know that you're operating from identity crisis or broken identity, right? As a whole, like on a surface, just so you know, if we had to call it something, I believe the problem that the world is facing is identity crisis. To make it personal to ourselves, you know, how do we recognize or know if we're operating from broken identity? All right. So beyond that, we want to put, this is where we kind of bring in agreement, how agreement ties into identity, right? Once you establish how you identify, like me, I identify with love, right? I am not the source of love, but I do identify. Beyond identity is how you agree. Right? So if you identify as a person, that is in essence saying, I agree, I am a person. If you identify as a man, in essence, you're saying, I agree, I am a man. So you're operating from agreement, right? Now the baseline, we still have to discover, explore that. What is your baseline if you identify as a man? Because not all men are the same. Right? Are you a kind man? Are you a compassionate man? What is your work ethic? So just kind of throwing language around what that's going to look like beyond when you say, I identify as an athlete. Are you a basketball player, a football player? Do you play tennis? Do you swim? Right? So this is to establish language around that. That's now beyond that, it's knowing or recognizing, well, what are you in agreement with? Because every athlete is unique to themselves, right? So I identify as an athlete. I'm in agreement, right? So I've done the work. I've gone in, I've gone through trial and error. This is where our experience cultivate this, is going to cultivate this language for us, right? So each experience is an opportunity to discover what you like, what you don't like, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. This is where our emotions having a voice, always speaking, is very relevant and important. How do you know what you like? How do you know what doesn't work? So me as an athlete, specifically, I identify with strength training, functional training, mobility, just to put language to this, right? Those are the things that I'm in agreement with, right? So some athletes might, you know, take a cold dip into for recovery. Like recovery would look different. I'm trying to establish the difference between what the baselines are and beyond just saying I identify as an athlete, raising awareness that every athlete is not the same. And they may have some uniform aspect of them, but even within that, there's going to be information that would set them apart. And that is important because you want to recognize what you're in agreement with. If we just park it at, oh, I'm a professional, and then you have another professional come alongside you, right? And now you both identify as professionals, but one is late all the time, one is not. And then you understand, well, I'm not in agreement with that. You know, I value being on time, right? So this is the language that I want to start to facilitate that contributes to our emotional well-being. Because let's say you and this other professional carpool every day. And now you find yourself going to work late because you're accommodating someone who is in agreement with being late. But you both identify as a professional. But beyond that, you're now operating from broken agreement because you're accommodating someone else's value, right? which lines up with what they're in agreement with. Now, they may be aware of it or not, but again, this is the awareness that I want to facilitate, right? So how long do you walk in that broken agreement, which on the surface level is reflected as broken identity, right? How long do you maintain that agreement in an area that you are not agreeing with? And how do you begin to be a person to facilitate the language around your emotions, right? That are always speaking or suggesting something, and beyond that, going ahead of that to see how are you showing up in that space. This is the responsibility. This is the language. These are the conversations that I want to facilitate and raise awareness to. And this is where the power of love begins to make us aware, one, the voice of our emotions. Now, if we can start hearing our emotions, then we can see them. And then beyond that, we can hold ourselves accountable because we now have a constant baseline, right? And so that's the other thing I want to raise awareness to. You know, we live in a world where we don't have a constant baseline as it relates to love, because love is relative to our experiences. Love is relative to an author. Love is relative to what's trending. Love is relative to a lot of things, but how much is it relative to God being the source of love, which now gives us way more to work with than the confinements of our experiences, the good, bad, and ugly experiences. Imagine your good, bad, and ugly functioning as a baseline for what love is. And so this is where I believe we start hearing the language. Oh, love doesn't work. You need more than love. You need respect. You need commitment. You need communication. You know, you need to be a good person because love just ain't enough. Well, what is love? And why isn't communication, why is communication not an expression of love when when God describes himself as love, which would demand that any experience cultivate or develop your capacity to be a better communicator? Meaning, why are we not making love relative to the source? Why are we reducing or confining love to be how we feel or what we've experienced or what someone else has told us? And so that's where I believe as a whole and as a society, we're disconnected and we're not experiencing the power of love. And this is what I want to facilitate. So I'm going to look back at my notes, but I want to wrap it up. Okay, so we went over identity crisis. And now I kind of want to finish and end this with putting the baseline out there. This is what the filter is. Now, we all have to make a conscious decision on what our baseline is. But remember, in the beginning, I said anything can function as a baseline. What is the baseline? The filter, right? And so if you want to be a person, you know, if you already know who you are, meaning you know who, you know, how you identify, right? I identify with love, so I hold myself accountable for maintaining agreement with love. So anytime that agreement is broken, I have a constant baseline and I can go back and restore that part of me that was lost and broken, right? But I'm also aware of the voice of my emotions, so I can go into my life and even be able to recognize when, where, and how that happened, that agreement got broken, right? And so beyond that, I now have more purpose, meaning, and resources to navigate, to restore myself, because I have a constant baseline of information that I'm about to talk about and close with that, right? Now, if your baseline is rooted in trauma, if your baseline is rooted in, you know, love language, that's a book. If your baseline is rooted in something that you subscribe to as far as information, which may change, right? You're responsible for going into, so this is a personal choice. This is not me imposing my beliefs or my work on you. This is me facilitating awareness and establishing language and really, really hoping that I can inspire you by sharing myself and sharing this information where you can take personal responsibility and say, well, what is my baseline? I know who I am. But as a human being, we have all experienced and continue to experience some type of trauma, something minor or not. Now remember, this is the good, bad, and ugly. How do you even recognize what a right relationship is in any given aspect of your life? What is your baseline? What is your filter? What are you operating from? What are you in agreement with, right? Beyond your identity, what is the foundation of your identity, right? For the purpose of establishing language. What is the foundation of our identity, right? So I want to close with what Minds is and why I believe it is the power of love that we're missing in this world, because love is more relative to our own personal experiences versus being relative to the source of love. Okay? So I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you have enjoyed it, if you're interested in hearing more, which I plan on showing up more, please subscribe, share this message, and I'm going to close out with this scripture that acts as the baseline and filter for me, right? And it is the expanded definition of love. If you go on Google, Google defines love as an intense emotion. We need more than that. We need more than a feeling to facilitate power and language around our emotions that are always pulling and tugging us, right? Because they want to be heard. And so before I finish, the last thing I want to say is, this is where we learn the value of relating to our emotions versus becoming them. But we need the how. So this is the how, okay? So my head is down. And this is 1 Corinthians 13, 3 through 8. And the last verse is 13, right? So I'm going to start with verse 3. And that's 1 Corinthians 13, 3 through 8. It's like a tongue twister. And the last verse is 13. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own. Love is not provoked. Love thinks no evil. Love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things. Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So who are we making love relative to? Because that is the power. That is going to be where we begin to experience the impact of how love functions as a filter. And that's also the voice and the language to speak back to those emotions, our emotions that are always wanting to divide us. But that's not all. So whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. And verse 13, and now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. And I want to close with that. I'm Zephaniah Francois, and I'm advocating for your emotions. And I'm advocating for love, because when the smoke clears, the only thing we're going to have is love. So I believe we need a constant baseline that we can all hold ourselves accountable to pulling from, so that we can be whole within our identity, right? And we can be restored anytime our identity is broken, because that's going to happen. I believe we're responsible for doing that daily. You can have a conversation and be broken. How do you restore that, right? By engaging in your emotions. And how do you do that? In a right connection, a right relationship, right? And so I'll go over that in my next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I talked a lot. I'm practicing, going through a lot of trial and error. So please have a lot of grace as I establish myself on this channel. The main takeaway, I am advocating for your emotions. I'm advocating for love. And I'm here to facilitate awareness around how that looks. Bye.